All right. Welcome everyone to this next virtual parent coffee where topic for discussion today will be key moves that we as parents and caregivers can make to help our children transition to self-directed learning. And even though some folks are going to be joining in a little bit late and some folks are not able to join, we want to record and we're going to go ahead and jump in. And just in terms of format, I'm going to share a lot of content up front. And I put this emoji of a runner in here because I'm going to go kind of fast and it's going to be a lot of content. It's going to feel a little bit like a fire hose. But I want to get the content out there because it's substantive. And then we'll open it up for some Q&A briefly amongst us all. And then Max is actually setting up some small groups for us. So Forest School Online folks are going to go into a breakout room. Forest School in-person folks are going to go into one or more breakout rooms. And then we will share some final thoughts. Max will do final thoughts with Forest School Online, and I will do with Forest School in person. So that's the format. In terms of today's topic, it could be titled many different ways. You know, I use the term self-directed learning. We could talk about key moves to help children develop agency. If this is a word you've never heard before, the idea is that agency is when someone has both the skill and the will to achieve the goals that they have for themselves. So it's not just being able to set a goal, but having um, the skills, the competencies needed to achieve those goals, and then having the will, the sustained motivation to be able to do that. How do you help children do that? Another way to describe it or title it would be how to help children lead their own learning. What are some key moves that we as parents can make? And I want to go ahead and put out there a framework that's very instructive for us as guides and leaders at the Forest School. There's a really fantastic researcher called Zaretta Hammond, who's written a great book on culturally responsive teaching, who describes the difference between a dependent learner and an independent learner. And this is something we're very passionate about. Most schools, whether online or not, in the United States and elsewhere, learners are in these schools and they're having to follow rules they didn't make. They're having to listen to answers or explanations of questions that they didn't ask. And if you just sort of reflect, what's their life going to be like if they experience 12 years of that? You know, there's really an I would call an epidemic of dependent learners that our current education system is really cultivating, because it's not developing the kind of agency that we want to see. It's really and so what are the qualities of a dependent learner? And Dr. Hammond suggests, you know, in the context of a school, a dependent learner is dependent on a teacher to carry most of the cognitive load of a task always, is also unsure how to tackle a new task. And maybe they're kind of shut down when they're given a new challenge, or they cannot complete a task without scaffolds. And in the education field, a scaffold is kind of scaling something back to meet a child where they are. And they're not able to sort of do that for themselves, break down complex things into simple parts. Um, that's a dependent learner. Also will sit passively and they'll wait until a teacher intervenes. They'll kind of wait to be told what to do. And then lastly, they don't retain information well, or they don't get it. That's kind of a broad understanding of a dependent learner. Now, an independent learner, on the other hand, relies on the teacher or the guide to carry some, but not all or most of the cognitive load, and only temporarily. An independent learner utilizes strategies and processes for tackling a new task, like most of us as adults, caregivers, parents, we've learned to do. An independent learner regularly attempts new tasks without scaffolds. I actually had a learner at the Forest School approach me 2 days ago. He's an 8-year-old, and he said, "Hey, Tyler, I want to add German to my badge plan." And I said, "That's amazing, Sam. Tell me about your goals and what you want to do." And he kind of laid it out for me and how far he wanted to get. It was a great conversation, but a great example of an independent learner. An independent learner has cognitive strategies for getting unstuck and has learned how to retrieve information from their long-term memory. And this is, in the context of a school, this is the kind of transition we're hoping that learners make, whether it's in person or virtual. And we are, as guides, thinking all the time about what are the moves that we can make to help learners build these skills, and how can we be intentional about this. And I'm telling you, it is hard work. It is both an art and a science. And the question for us as parents today is, what are key moves we can do at home? And what does an independent learner look like at home? This research that I'm sharing with you all today is coming from a landscape analysis that we at the Forest Schools and our Institute for Self-Directed Learning did and published this year in it's called a 2021 landscape analysis of self-directed learning that includes recommendations for transforming educational practice. And if you're at all interested in that, we have both a short executive summary of our findings as well as a 60 plus page detailed research report that you can download at selfdirect.school. We've shared this report really internationally at Harvard, at the University of Pennsylvania, at an international education innovation nonprofit called 100, at a national nonprofit here in the United States called Transcend. And we want to share some of those takeaways with you today. When we did this research, we brought together researchers from recent times as well as decades prior in order to inform our understanding of self-directed learning and how that's cultivated, or how we cultivate learner agency or learner-ledness, independent learners. And those are pictures of some of the researchers that were featured in our study. And this is the team that actually put the research together. And you might not know this, but these folks are connected to the Forest School Online and the Forest School in person. They work for our institute. Christina is full-time with our institute. Aaron, Brandy, and Rachel are a part of our sort of cloud of consultants that sometimes do projects with us. And the five of us collaborated to write this report and publish it. This morning at breakfast, I asked my own children, when it comes to transitioning to self-directed learning and learner-led environment, what did your mom and I do that helped? And what did your mom and I do that actually that hurt the process? And I have an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 14, and a 16-year-old. I just want to share with you what they said. So my 8-year-old said, well, what you did that helped is sometimes you let me stay at home to do work. My 10-year-old said he was actually social. He was like, when you talk to me about the other kids at the school, that actually helps me the most. My 14-year-old said, I'm good. That's really not much. And my 16-year-old said, when you lay off, Dad, that's the thing that helps me the most in a learner-led environment. And when I asked him what hurts, I got some really great answers. My 8-year-old said, not much. I'm good. My 10-year-old said, Dad, if you say it's safe, self-paced environment, but then you give me consequences at home for being behind, that hurts, because then it's really not self-paced. That was great feedback for me, actually. My 14-year-old, similarly, he's like, not much, I'm good. And then my 16-year-old agreed with my 10-year-old. She said, if you give consequences for being behind, Dad, that actually adds stress. There's already natural consequences built into the learning model, and that's enough. I don't need any more stress, was her plea to me. So what I want to do is I want to share with y'all from this research report and from evidence, 5 ways that caregivers can empower learners. I'm going to open it up for Q&A, and then we'll have a breakout discussion about what you do in your home to empower self-directed learning. So the first is the idea of treasuring connection over compliance. So how can we in our homes, how can we value connecting with our learners over getting them to do something that we want them to do? That's the idea. So from our report, a quote, compliance can undermine authenticity and trust in adult learner relationships by introducing psychological threat and shame into the environment, which causes our brains to create a stress response. I think my daughter and my 10-year-old boy were mentioning this to me this morning. In this survival mode, learning shuts down, and then fight or flight response is executed into high gear. Compliance-driven cultures can also damage executive function skills in children because adults are viewed as the keepers and the disseminators of knowledge and the creators of the rules, and the learners or students as passive recipients who must comply by their standards and rules. This environment does not prepare learners to think critically, plan intentionally, and make good choices. again, from the report, the importance of being in a relationship and having a social and emotional connection to our children in order to create a safe space for learning is so, so important. And we have so some practical strategies, for that are at home. What if we provide choices to our learners instead of demands? You know, if here are the options, you can do this, this, or this. What do you want? Another practical strategy is to dialogue with them and show interest in them and in their work and encourage them daily. And then also to model learning from failure. I told my children this morning a story about a failure I had recently and what I learned from it. How often are we doing that with our learners? And this is a quote from one of the mothers of our seniors from last year. When asked about treasuring connection over compliance, she responded, it really calls for a reframing of what it means to support your child along their educational journey. It's transitioning from how was your day to what did you choose to do with your day today? It will require amplifying the voices of our children and decentering our own adult voices. And I can just, testify to the fact, even starting the 4 schools was a transition for me in doing this change that Nikki was describing. Another parent of a senior from last year, I always try and stay engaged with my learner. I'm always asking, how are things going? What's new? What are you working on? How's the assignment coming, etc. They know I'm always available if they do need help or just talk through whatever they're working on. So that's the first one, treasuring connection over compliance. Um, as I mentioned, I'm going to go fast. I'm going to get through all 5. We'll open it up for questions, and then we're going to have some deeper discussion in small groups. The second thing that caregivers we can do to empower our learners is to let them struggle and fail. And we can celebrate learning from failure. How hard is this? How hard is it as parents to let them struggle and to let them fail? A few quotes from some parents. I think allowing your children to fail and learn from those failures is the most important thing you can do to help them, says Kristen. Jennifer says, it's difficult as it is to watch from the sidelines and sometimes to see your children fail. It's important to allow them to have freedom within guardrails. Matt says, allow your child to struggle and allow them to take the lead on their future. Back off as a fixer and a doer. And Opal says, stop looking for perfection. Instead, take a step back and trust them to make mistakes and follow their instincts. This is necessary to help them build confidence. And these are parents who've been a part of a learner-led environment for a number of years, sharing their own experiences. From our report, the evidence suggests that without consistent opportunities to make mistakes and embrace failure as learning, learners can develop a sense of learned helplessness. That is the giving up reaction, the quitting response that follows from the belief that whatever you do doesn't matter. And obviously we want to avoid that. A third way that we as caregivers can empower learners is to share consistent and constructive feedback to the school. And I think the reason this is so important is because learners themselves, as y'all remember our weekly surveys that go to Max and me, there's a spot on there for learners to share their feedback with the school. And we want them to feel like they can actually make change happen. And so I want to continue to just encourage you to invite them to share their feedback. And that's really the main avenue to be able to do that. Obviously, they can talk to their guide, they can Slack their guide, they can talk to a guide during their check-in. But this feedback survey, if they're not able to share in a check-in, if they're not able to Slack it, and they want to share it anonymously, the feedback survey is a great way to do that. Y'all know the survey, you're familiar with it, you see it every week. I don't need to rehash that, but I do want you to know every Monday as a team, Max's team and my team, we look at that feedback, and when it's helpful, we incorporate it. We thank the giver, and then we communicate the changes that are made. If it's emotional venting, we ignore it because we know there's nothing we can do. And if it's good feedback, but it's not mission aligned with a learner-led environment, then we share how and why it's not mission aligned, and thus why a change, won't be made. And then if there's a follow-up conversation that needs to happen with Max or with me, we welcome that, and at any point. And I think this is huge. I think the worst thing that could happen, or some of the worst things I've seen happen, is when a learner or a parent kind of gets so frustrated or fed up over time that they really don't share their constructive criticism with us, with the guides, with me, or with Max until it's too late, until they're just like, I'm done with this, and that's the kind of learned helplessness we want to avoid. We want to create a continuous learning mechanism. A fourth, and so a question actually for, for your family is, what's an avenue that you have for your children to share feedback with you? And what's your process for responding? Do you have a family meeting? Do they feel like they can, that they have a voice? There's something, I'll just confess, there's something I'm working on as a dad, where, if I speak to them in a certain way, I let them charge me money because I'm trying to get over it, because I don't think it's helpful when I talk this way. And I want them to have that empowerment. And so they can actually charge me $10 if I speak that way. And I got charged $10 a couple weeks ago. It's not something that feels good, but I want them to feel empowered in that way. That's just one of the mechanisms I have at my house. We have breakfast every morning at my house, and so and I ask them, "What do you need? How you feeling?" Um, and That's part of our mechanisms. But in your home, what's your mechanism for receiving that feedback from your learners, and then how can they see that their feedback is actually having an impact, is making a change in your home? Fourthly, lend, request, and extend social capital for your child. Now, social capital, if this term isn't familiar to you, it's very, very dear to our hearts at the Forest Schools. It means the practical help that emerges from caring, trusting relationships. It really is the strength and the extent and the quality and depth of relationships that learners have. And as parents, you have more than your learners do. And so the idea is that you would lend it, that you would literally give them some of your relationship capital with others to support them. And this is so, so important. A student's relationship network is among the strongest predictors of educational outcomes. The set of resources that are found in family relations and in community social organization attributes to a number of educational achievements, including but not limited to much lower dropout rates, improved adaptation pathways, foreign language acquisition, higher grade point averages, and lower levels of misbehavior. One of the things I love about our parents at the Force Schools is we are willing to share our networks. We'll put on a private Facebook page, for example, hey, my daughter is looking to do an internship, or excuse me, an apprenticeship with a dentist. Does anyone know a dentist? And 2 or 3 people will respond, oh, I know a dentist. This is the kind of way that we share our relationships, and we lend that and give that to our learners. This is really a game changer. This is one of the strongest, if not the strongest, predictors of education in the life of our children. And so how might we as parents, extend those relationships? You all know, and have likely seen the video. I mean, we have dream teams at the Forest School. One of the reasons we have dream teams is so that our learners can experience and feel that broad network of caring, trusting adults that they have in their corner, who are champions and allies of them. And so you probably, as a parent or caregiver, have helped them with a dream team to make introductions, to include folks on that, to encourage other adults to join you in that venture. And there's really 3 different kinds of social capital that we are tracking and trying to grow at the Forest School. And so I would ask you as a family, how are you tracking and growing these in your homes? There's 3 different kinds of social capital. One is called bonding, one is bridging, and one is linking. Bonding is when your child has relationships that are great, that are with people that are like them, maybe the same race, same economic status, maybe the same religion. There's a lot of commonalities, though. Those are crucial relationships. But then there's bridging. How strong are the relationships that our children have with people who are different than them? Maybe a different religion, maybe a different economic status, maybe a different worldview, a different race, different cultural background, different geography. And then lastly, linking. These are the strength and the depth of the relationships that our learners have with people who are in power, people who can get them a job, people who can make a recommendation, people who can write a recommendation for them, people who can give them an apprenticeship, people who can make a connection for them. When we as parents think about these 3 kinds of social capital relationships for our children, we are literally empowering them to be even more learner-led and even more independent. And so how are we extending their social capital? How are we creating a support system, Louise says, that rewards out-of-the-box thinking, that encourages a team approach to life when making decisions, regardless of the impact or size of the decision? and continually highlights the value of the approach to the problem, situation, or conflict more than the result. This will help them create a network and a framework that eventually becomes a mental model that will help them for the rest of their life. And then lastly, a fifth way that we as caregivers can empower our learners is to identify learning objectives for your children and pursue or create environments that cultivate them. Max and me talk about this a lot. This is our profile of a graduate at the Forest Schools. And these are the outcomes that, learners are getting practice at on a daily basis. And these are, as we understand it, they are outcomes that we all as parents care deeply about, that they would learn to be great people, that they would learn to do key marketplace skills, that they would learn on their own, and that they would understand those core academics, and that they would learn how to live together and collaborate and empathize with others and build trust. You also, as parents, in addition to this, you have other goals for your children. For example, I'm a person of faith, and that's not on this list. And so how am I creating experiences for them outside of the context of school for them to develop their faith? What's a learner outcome that you have for your child that's not on this list? And how are you at home providing that opportunity for them to cultivate that? So those are 5 ways that we as parents and caregivers to empower learners to really shoulder the responsibility for their own learning. I have some discussion questions that I would love to share so we can go into breakout rooms and kind of share ideas and shamelessly steal ideas from one another. But before I do, I would love to just kind of open it up for questions. Do you have any clarifying questions or probing questions about anything that I've said so far?
Hi. One of my questions is on the second thing about the failure. And I love that philosophy. And a lot of the quotes that you had mentioned were that it's just so hard as a parent to not fix it and, to fight that perfectionism. But how far is too far? If they're not doing work all day long, or it goes into the second day, how long is okay to watch our kid not do work, because we're online? How far is too far?
That's a great question. I wonder if that resonates with other folks. I see some smiles and nods. One of the most important things about learning, and our report details this as well, is quick feedback loops. So I think the thing I would wonder about would be, are learners experiencing the natural consequences of their decisions within a time horizon that they can feel it? And if the answer is yes, then I think it's going to be profound. If the answer is no, then it's probably an opportunity missed. And that's why in our learning model, we try to embed enough frequent natural consequences for them, falling behind, not getting a badge, something not being able to be approved, not getting credit for something, not having a daily example, we have learners share their work every single day at the school. Not having something to share, that's unfortunate. And that's a consequence, because we want to share. And that's a great opportunity. And learners feel that if they don't have something to share, they literally feel that and internalize that. And that's an opportunity. It's not the end all be all kind of feedback, but I would say, in my opinion, it has to do with, from what I understand from the research, that quick feedback loop. Now, I will say, on the other end of the spectrum, if we do have a child who's experienced some trauma and has experienced maybe an adverse childhood effect, and if this phrase is new to you, I would encourage you to look up ACEs, ACES, adverse child effects, online and see a list of ACEs. There are some children who've experienced so much trauma that that failing can be a threat to their safety, their psychological safety, and they need maybe a more curated, safer environment. So that might be a different conversation or a different category of learner. But that's kind of what comes up for me. That having been said, Max, I wonder if you have any thoughts to that question, or parents, if you have any thoughts or answers to that great question.
Well, I had kind of a follow-up question to that, because I think I see that with like when you're in the quest or all of that, if you don't have something to share, it's obvious. I think something that's tough is when they're doing core skills. And I've heard this from some other especially online parents, is when they aren't doing any core skills and they have their weekly meeting, but they aren't kind of being told, hey, you have fallen behind. And so sometimes that first you're behind comes and they're shocked, so how, I guess it's, it's very clear what you're supposed to have at the end of civilizations or something like that. But when core skills is all year long and you don't realize how far behind you're falling, I guess that's sort of a follow-up question on that.
That's great, Allie. I mean, the intent of a check-in too is to bring that to light. So the intent of a check-in is that guides on a weekly basis would hold up a mirror and look at their goals and say, hey, I noticed that these were your goals for the week. This is the progress that you made. And to crosswalk their aspirational goals with what they actually did and bring that before them. And so at minimum, they should be receiving that feedback on a weekly basis. If they're not, that would be a problem and something we need to know and tweak. But one of the things I would invite you to do as parents and caregivers, we have a lot of parents and caregivers who love to do this, is actually joining a check-in, whether it's virtually, sometimes in person, and actually be with them and see the questions that the guides are asking and holding them accountable to. Because oftentimes in those check-ins, they'll get that real world feedback, or that they'll get that aha moment, like, oh, wow, I did set these goals. I didn't meet them. And then the guide will respond in a non-judgmental way and say, well, what does that make you think? What does that make you think about your goals? What kind of goals do you want to set for this week? What are the challenges you're going to face when you try and reach these goals? How are you going to overcome those challenges? And in my experience, the longer we've done this, the more I've seen that just being asked those questions, even at a young age. I mean, my 10-year-old, who you know well, he has now internalized these natural consequences, absent of me, kind of on his own, because he's been asked that over and over, for years now in the environment. And he even told me this morning, it was an aha moment for me. He was like, Dad, I'm okay finishing elementary late, because he's struggling with math so much. So that's a conversation his mother and I need to have, because parents, respond to that differently. But that was an aha moment for me. And I was like, wow, he really has internalized this sort of, like, he's okay going slow, So it was a nice challenge for me. But I would say that's the check-ins is a mechanism that is meant to solve for that.
Yeah. So I had an interesting conversation with Zach yesterday and I think I guess this question is a little bit more for first year parents, because he was saying that last year he just had his check-in with Shamira. And so his goal was 14 Zern lessons in a week. And he said, well, last year I used to say 5, and she didn't, that's just sort of, she said, okay, that's your goal. And so he fulfilled his goal, but his goal was not enough to get him to finish math in time. So I think the question more is when kids, because I didn't know, I was like, okay, if 5 Zern lessons seems reasonable to the guide, then that must be enough to get him through. So what happens when kids are meeting their goals, but their goals are not going to get them to finish their bed?
I can agree with that as well. My 7-year-old Lily, I'll say, what are your goals today? And she's like, well, I'm going to take a walk. I'm going to, do 10 jumping jacks and make lunch. And I was like, okay, that's great. But what about core skills? And she's just like, I'm good. I'm good. I'm going to meet my goals. And I'm just like, well, do I need to push her and like force the core skills? Because otherwise she feels perfectly content not doing any, basically.
Those are
I agree as well. I have the same issue. And when I ask questions, they kind of give me the look like, well, I'm supposed to be able to do it how I want to do it. And then I get kind of stuck like, well, that's true. But is that going to give you the goal that you're looking for at the end of the school year? So I don't know if I should, push ahead or kind of hold and let them fail.
Yeah, this is great. Just a side note, Susan, that might be the cutest set of goals I've heard in a long time. That's amazing. But Allie, Susan, Rita, to your question, what we as guides can do, in fact, what is a responsibility of the guides to do, is to guide each learner to know if they want to be on track, how much progress do they need to be making on every single platform every single week? That should be completely evident, clear, transparent. If you want to know that, you can know that too. And Ali, to your point, if with Shamira, I don't know, this is the first time I'm learning about that with Shamira and the 5 Zern lessons per year. Either that was a miss on our part or is some kind of miscommunication that I just don't know about. But that's easy. Like if y'all don't know that and want to know that, you can, for School Online folks, ask Shamira and Max, like, give me the percentage, like how much percentage on Lexia, how much percentage on No Red Ink, how many lessons on Zern need to be completed for them to be on track. That should be clear to everyone so that we're all on the same page. We all know, and and there's no ambiguity there whatsoever. And that's easy.
I would like to say something to add something. Hello, all. I believe that when the kids get behind, it's somehow can worries me as a mom, but at the same time, it's such a learning experience for them and for us as parents. And it is good that they can realize, obviously, the consequences for not doing what they have to do and on time, but at the same time, it's asking the why, which I'm starting to realize. Why is my learner behind? Why is my hero not doing the core skills? So always looking like deeper, why they are not interested in some platforms and in others they are. And I think that's giving us answers personally.
Yep. Anna, thank you for sharing that. So I'm hearing you say a couple things. One is, when they do fall behind, it's a learning moment for them, as well as for the parents. And I'm also hearing you say that, what's sometimes not clear to you is their lack of interest or motivation for a particular platform. Is that right?
Yes, wondering why they don't want to do it, why they want to do some platforms and they don't want to do the other ones. So like for me, realizing why, for instance, my 7-year-old was not doing CERN, I found like other situations was just not because she didn't want to do it. It was because it was very challenging for her and she didn't understand certain things. So also always looking at the perspective behind the scenes, why certain things are happening. It's not sometimes just saying, well, you should do it and that's it. It's trying to help them to find a way.
Absolutely. Anna, I love that. And what you just described there is what we do at the school every day, which is we try and find a way that will increase motivation. So one of the jobs of the guides is we're thinking regularly about incentives, both extrinsic and intrinsic motivators, as well as individual and group motivators. And what we know about this work is that for different learners, they're motivated by different things. Some learners are very motivated by points and freedom levels. Other learners are very motivated by their own hero's journey and like what goals they have for their own life, what they're trying to accomplish. Some learners are motivated by social promotion. They literally want to stay on track so that they can be with their friends and move on to the next level at a certain time. Some learners are deeply engaged in the content, which is beautiful and amazing. And then some learners are not engaged. And as guides, one of the questions we're doing at school all the time is and this is just a key principle of learning science, if a learner does not see relevance or find value in their learning, they're not going to learn deeply. I mean, that's just a reality. And so part of the hard work that's on us is to help them make connections between, learning what a conic is and how that's going to be helpful when you're, at home, how that's going to be helpful when you're 16, how that's going to be helpful when you're 25, when you're 43, whatever it is, and making those connections for them. That's one of the reasons why we do the kind of hands-on stuff, the quests, the civ, the storytelling, is to help them see, oh, this is where you use that. This is where you can apply that. This is where this gets, meaningful and useful in the real world. But it's honestly, Anna, it's an ongoing, forever, continual challenge for us as guides, and I think for us as parents too. It's how do we show them the relevance and the importance of what it is that they're learning. Great question. Any thoughts on that before we kind of go into breakout rooms? I want to invite you. I just put it in the chat. If you will click on the discussion questions, it's called Key Parent Moves. It's a bit.ly link. And Max is going to send For School Online families into a group. And I'm going to join y'all for just a few minutes. And then Max, how many breakout rooms did you make for For School in-person families? 1 or 2?
So right now I have one in-person family with 6 families in it. I thought that'd be a good size. I can split that into 2 groups of 3, or we could keep it as 1 group of 6.
1 group of 6 is great.
All right.
All right, y'all. So basically, we're gonna. I will For School in-person families. I'm gonna go with Max and the For School Online for just a few minutes, and then I'm gonna come back to y'all. But does everybody have the discussion questions there from the chat? Great, and I'll see you in a few minutes. Max, if you want to open those up.